This one's gonna leave you thinking. I don't think I've ever seen a scarier synopsis of the ruling elite's moral corruption as when Tucker Carlson spoke to Joe Rogan, and perhaps it answers a question people have every time a new large scandal from the top jolts the public. How could someone live with themselves after that? The answer unravels a moral and intellectual weakness that has gripped the ruling elite, and that's why I need to take the time to explore what that truly means after you take a look at this.
If you look at the committee chairmen who allow this shit to happen year after year, they're all, and I don't know, people say, oh, they're compromised or being blackmailed or whatever. I don't have evidence of that, but I know them, and they all have things to hide. I know that for a fact. And so it's not a stretch of imagination to imagine that, you know, some committee chairman who's allowing warrantless spying on Americans to continue, or whatever abuse they're allowing, knowing fully or hiding the truth about UAPs, ignoring the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. Like, why are they doing that? It's not impossible to imagine that some guy with a drinking problem or a weird sex life, and that's very common up there, that's why they're doing it. Because they don't want to be exposed. I don't have evidence of that. I don't have proof of that.
Right.
But that's not a crazy thing to assume that could be happening.
I know that's an uncomfortable thought, especially if someone's brought up in a cocoon thinking the government is really just boots and clockwork functioning according to a rule book known as the Constitution. But the last few years with the pandemic, and more importantly with the release of the Epstein documents, reveals something much more sinister. A lot of politicians are beholden to anyone but the people they supposedly serve, because every moral weakness, financial corruption, and deviant behavior is a potential string for control and blackmail. And if you know anything about how governments work, you know the constant tussle of power where those weaknesses are easy to exploit. Remember, evidence is naturally going to be scarce in something like this, but perhaps it's worth an attempt connecting that dot in your head. What do you get when the ruling elite's darkest secrets land in the lap of interest groups, intel agencies, or foreign governments that would love nothing more than to have that handle on the elite? You end up with control with an undercurrent of blackmail, and what does that do? Well, that compromised ruling elite goes further down the path of degeneracy while becoming weaker and more controlled in the process. I don't have to take any names for you to understand what I mean. Haven't you had moments where you want to pull your hair out for why governments or presidents wouldn't take the most basic steps to protect the country or the people? Take, for example, the current border crisis, where more than 7 million illegal immigrants have entered the United States in a mere 3 years of the current government. How hard could it be to put a stop to that for a government with all the power and money at its disposal? But too many people simply don't want to look at what may actually be happening. Every conglomerate of businesses that likes the cheap labor, every lobbyist or interest group that benefits from it, and every politician that likes the changing voter-based demographics is a force that a president has to fight against in order to make that happen. And in all of this intricate web of incentives that each member of the ruling class is trapped in, the personal morality or sportsmanship of their detractors can hardly prevent the temptation to exploit and control. But that's just the overarching structure of how easy it is for a corrupt or compromised politician to be controlled. For anyone who still believes in the naively simplistic story of national politics the MSM portrays, there's much darker truths of what's going on at the top that makes that control possible in the first place.
I said to somebody, a very powerful person, the other day in a conversation in my kitchen, an elected official holds a really senior position, a very famous person. I was going crazy. I was so mad about all this stuff and about the warrantless spying and about the funding for these insane wars. And I said to the guy who serves in one of the legislative bodies, I got so mad my dogs were afraid. They're like, well, why are you yelling? Because I don't yell at home. But I was like, all these people are controlled. They're all, you know, got weird sex lives and all these things are hiding and they're being blackmailed by the intel agencies. And he said, and I'm quoting, I know. It was like, okay, so at this point we're just sort of admitting that's real? Like, why do we allow that to continue?
The answer to that question is we don't have the power they do. It's said that a peaceful society is one where the government is a monopoly of violence. Well, we should have figured out by now how wrong this idea becomes the moment that the government itself becomes compromised along with its monopoly on violence. And then they're willing to go to any lengths to hide their crimes and wrongdoings, even if it means starting wars, bribing people, or ending someone's life. Isn't that what everyone quietly understands the whole Epstein saga as? Power seeks weak people as a vessel, and there's no weaker than someone that has a dark secret to hide. Back when these recent flight logs hadn't even been released, the crimes of the powerful ruling elite were made clear by former Israel spy Ben Menashe and the handler of Ghislaine Maxwell's spy father in the 2020 book, Epstein, dead men tell no tales. Using blunt and unfiltered language, he wrote in the book about the honey trap operations that foreign and domestic intelligence agencies would use on world politicians. A part of it reads, and I quote, "See, effing around is not a crime. It could be embarrassing, but it's not a crime. But effing a 14-year-old girl is a crime, and he was taking photos of politicians effing 14-year-old girls. If you want to get it straight, Epstein and Maxwell would blackmail people like that." That's as dark as it gets, but we may truly be blind to how dark it can really be at the top of power hierarchies in society, money, and politics.
Having people compromise thing, God, that's an old story.
It's the oldest story.
J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, it's all of them. It's Epstein's Island. It's everything.
But look, I don't have any. I'm telling you, what's the phrase the finance guys use? Open kimono. Like, I'm actually telling you all I know. I don't know anything else.
Right.
But I know that the publicly available facts tell a really clear story, which is the government is not acting on behalf of the population. And so it's inherently illegitimate because its only legitimacy derives from the citizenry. The only reason the government can do things that it does, kill people, collect money by force, all the powers that it has, come from one place, and that's the consent of the governed. That's the only legitimacy they have.
I think that's the hypnosis that much of the world population has been snapped out of in the last few years as people realize how fragile every large system or group of people is that we put our trust in, and so it is with the government. In the end, as old ways of thinking crumble, more cynical views of the world will take over, and that may lead to a short-sighted selfishness to take over people in their individual lives as they realize the people up top are too corrupt or compromised to be relied on. They'll realize that alleged corruption scandals or affairs are seldom a problem for politicians if they allow themselves to be controlled, and then there's a whole rabbit hole of corruption and moral degeneracy you can trace that results in even greater control and blackmail by interest groups, foreign intelligence, and hostile governments.
If this is true, and if these people are compromised because they're secretly perverts and creeps,
They are, though.
and they're corrupt, and they steal money, or all these different things are evil things. Lying, controlling people, engaging in unnecessary wars that are going to cost thousands of lives for profit. All these things are evil things. So if evil is real, evil would want those kind of people to be in a position of power.
Yes. Evil is an independent force that exists outside of people, that acts upon people. I really believe that. I've experienced it. A lot. And it's obvious. And what vessel do they choose? The weak.
That's so true, and it reminds me of something Jordan Peterson has often said, quote, "If you think strong men are dangerous, wait till you see what weak men are capable of." The thing about weakness is it's not a real thing. Instead, it's simply a vacuum left by strength. When that vacuum is of moral strength, the worst temptations can swoop in to take its place as weak people become empty vessels for evil. Jordan has also often called people to not do things that make you weak, and I think everyone knows that feeling of weakness after having done something wrong or lied about something. It chips away at a part of you and leaves you frantic to make sure no one finds out. In the end, that weakness is just not worth it when put in front of the strength that comes from being true to yourself and set of your morals. I think this was a fascinating bit of conversation that stood out to me. There's certainly some vital lessons here that you can take for your own life.